In this video, I want to go over the check by queen problem on Codewars, and what it's going to do is it's going to pass us a two-dimensional matrix representing a chessboard, and there's going to be two pieces on it, a king and a queen. We need to determine whether or not the king is in check, and it shows this little diagram here. So, a little diagram here, it shows all the ways that the queen can move. It can move along the rows, the columns, and diagonally. So, the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to take this board and we need to traverse it in such a way that we find the king and the queen. We need to know their position before we can check to see if the king is actually in check. So I'm just going to say for I in range of the length of board, this will be the rows. And for J in range of the length of the first element or the first array in this two-dimensional array, which will be the columns, so board of 0. What we need to do from here is we need to check each square to see if it is occupied by a king or queen. So we're going to say if the board of I, J, is equal to K. If that's the case, we found the king. So we're going to create a variable called king row, and that is going to be equal to I king column. King column is going to be equal to J. Okay. Now we also need to check for the queen, so we're going to do the same thing for the queen. If the board of I, J is equal to Q, we're just going to say queen row is equal to I and queen column is equal to J. Alrighty, we have, after we've iterated throughout our entire board, we have found the position of the king and the queen. To see if the king and the queen are on the same rows and columns is easy because up here we have the rows and the columns. So the rows and the columns are easy. The kind of difficult part is the diagonals. So we can just do a simple if statement, and we can say if the king row is equal to the queen row, so if they're on the same row, or the king column is equal to the queen column, well then we're going to return true because if the king and the queen are in the same row or column, that means that the king is in check. So return true. Okay, so this is a little bit more difficult, so I'm going to show you by example. I'm going to go to the paint board, and I'm going to show you this. So if you look at the diagonals, I've mapped out the coordinates. Along this diagonal here, you can see for each square that we traverse along this diagonal, the row and the column both go up by 1. However, on this one, it's a little bit different, but the pattern is basically the same. The row goes up by 1, but the column goes down by 1. So using this information, we can just play around with some numbers. Let's put a king here, so we'll put a king here, that's a K, and put a queen here. If we subtract the queen's row, so 0, minus the king's row, 3, and then we subtract the queen's column, so 4, minus the king's column, 1, what we will get is -3 and 3. So if we take the absolute value of both of these numbers, which will equal 3 and 3, we can use this method to find out if they are on the same diagonal, because if we subtract the king's row from the queen's row and the king's column from the queen's column, and we take the absolute value of both numbers and they are equal, what that means is they are in the same column. And this works for any column, this one, and this works for both these columns, or diagonals, this one and this one, and it works for any position that they are on that diagonal. So let's go back to our board, or our Codewars. So let's go here. So what we're going to do is we're going to create two more variables. We're going to create the diagonal row, and we're going to set this equal to the absolute value of the king row minus the queen row. So king row minus the queen row. And we're going to do the same thing for the diagonal column. And we're going to set this equal to the absolute value of the king column minus the queen column. And we are almost done. All we have to do is we need to evaluate these numbers. So what we're going to do is we're going to return true if the diagonal row is equal to the diagonal column. So if the diagonal row is equal to the diagonal column, and if that is not the case, we're going to return false. And that should be it. Hopefully it works. We'll test it. All 10 passed. Let's attempt it. And all 60 test cases passed. So that is the check by queen problem on Codewars. It's a bit more of an easy problem. I hope that you learned something though, and if you did, I would appreciate if you liked, commented, and subscribed, and I will see you guys in future tutorials.